Welcome back to Old School Sports and our Out of the Park Baseball 24 playthrough of the Buffalo Wings. We are at December 1st, 2030. The off season is well underway. We have not made a free agent acquisition yet. We honestly haven't even made a free agent offer at the major league level. But it has still been a very eventful off-season for the Wings over the past few episodes. So we're going to just start off this episode kind of summarizing where I think we are as a team. Also want to start by saying thank you to all of our loyal viewers and commenters for sharing your thoughts on what we've done well, what we haven't done well, what you would have done differently, what we could have done differently in the trade market, what you recommend we do in the upcoming international amateur free agent period. Always very helpful for me to hear your thoughts and input, and appreciate the comments. And I think that there's a lot to be learned by anyone who reads through the comment section on many of these episodes. So thank you for the interaction and the thoughts. So as I mentioned, it's been a busy off-season for the Wings, despite the fact that we have not actually signed anybody. So kind of summarizing where I think we are as a team right now here on December 1st. Our starting rotation, potentially for next year, is exactly the same as it was last year. You can see everybody pitched over 30 starts last year, so very healthy with the starting rotation. Obviously, the suspension of Ohtani for the end of the regular season and all of the playoffs was very poorly timed. But Ohtani was a very good pitcher for us. Everyone else was fine-ish. I think thinking about this rotation, Ohtani's in his mid-30s, Yinger's 30, and then Susanna, Painter, and Sullivan are in their mid to late 20s. So it's conceivable that Ohtani's a little worse this coming season than he was this past season. I think you could still make an argument that Harley and Susanna could get a slight bit better. Painter, Yinger, and Sullivan probably are what they are. So when all is said and done, I think the starting rotation should be solid again next year. Obviously, if we could add a great arm to the front of the rotation, would love to do that. Given the salary constraints we are under, probably not realistic for this offseason. But starting rotation, we are where we were a year ago. Bullpen, I would say, is a little bit worse right now than it was at the end of last season. We traded away Cade Smith, who split time as a closer with Andres Munoz last year. Adrian Morejon, who's been a big left-handed arm out of our bullpen for the past 3 seasons, is a free agent looking for big money. We can't bring him back. And then we also most notably moved on from Miguel Segura, who we picked up as a waiver wire acquisition at the start of last year, and Ji-Hoo Kim. Both of those guys were kind of borderline fifth starters, potentially in the case of Segura, an interesting arm for the pen. I think in the case of Kim, at this point, approaching 35 years of age, he was pretty much a replacement level guy, even out of the bullpen. Segura didn't perform as well as we would have hoped last year, so we were fine including him in a trade. But certainly, we have lost some talent in the bullpen. That said, we recently made a trade to bring on the left-handed pitcher Caleb Ferguson, who I think will be a nice arm for us out of the pen. We signed the left-handed pitcher Zane Adams. Actually, we traded for him also, a trade with Houston. I should be accurate in what I'm saying. Think he can be a solid left-handed arm for us out of the pen, even a guy who could probably start for us in a pinch as a 4th or 5th starter. So there's definitely some value there. Certainly he could compete with Sullivan to potentially be the 5th starter next year. I don't think that role is written in pen at this point. And then we also picked up Franklin Heel in a trade, who I think could be a nice right-handed arm out of our pen. Net, I would say that you could certainly argue that Cade Smith and Adrian Morejon were the 2 best pitchers of that group. But I think you could argue that Miguel Segura and Ji-Hoo Kim were the 2 worst of the group, Adams, Ferguson, and Heel are kind of in the middle of the pack there. So I think it's fair to say that our bullpen may be a little worse than it was a year ago at this point. But again, it's only December 1st. There's still a lot of time to make some changes to improve it in the offseason. Thinking about our everyday players, not a ton of changes. Deshaun Seifu back at second. Big upgrade at third base with Cam Collier. Adley Rutschman back at catcher. Samuel Basallo back at DH. Takao Ota back at first base. Danby Swanson takes over for Marcelo Meyer at shortstop. He will be better, or should be better, defensively. He probably is a bit worse offensively than Meyer when all is said and done. But Swanson is normal health. Meyer, still recovering from an injury, is going to come back either fragile or wrecked. So I think we're probably similar at shortstop, but I think the potential for shortstop to become a big problem this season if we had kept Meyer and he came back wrecked with lower skills than he previously had with the amount of money that he was making. We probably have a lower ceiling at shortstop now, but we also have a higher floor at shortstop now with Swanson out there. John Featherston in center field is obviously back and the same. The issues are our corner outfield, where right now we have Rafael Radillo and Shaylin Polanco. But when we talk about this, we are ignoring that left field should ultimately be Vance Honeycutt, who over the course of his 4 years in the major leagues has been year in and year out probably the most consistent offensive player on our team, coming off of a big injury. But if we bring Honeycutt back at left field, then essentially the only position where we may be worse than we were a year ago is going to be right field, where the likes of Rafael Radillo, Shaylin Polanco, and potentially even Vaughn Necker or Josh Springer from AAA are going to be competing. I think the fact that we did move on from some veteran corner outfielders, most notably Jace Barofin and Nick York, as well as Lang Choi, leaves us with a little bit of a hole there. So I think you could argue that we are worse at right field now than we were a year ago. But similar to the bullpen, which is the other area where I think you could argue that we are worse right now than we were a year ago, corner outfield and bullpen are two areas where historically I've been able to find some players to help us in the Rule 5 draft. And I think those are also two positions where when we get to mid-March or even early April, there could be some useful players still on the free agent market looking for money that we could afford. So I feel that like we can address both of the positions where we're worse. We are much better at third base with Cam Collier, who's better defensively than Jace Young was, and certainly much better offensively than Jace Young was. And he still has potential to get better, at least according to our scout, at the age of 26. So that's a big upgrade. Shortstop, I'm going to call an upgrade just because I have a lot more confidence that Danby Swanson is going to play 140 games out there than I do that Marcelo Meyer is actually going to play 140 games out there. And then we're a little weaker in one of the corner outfield spots, and we're a little weaker in the bullpen. And when I think about how we got there, we've cut $9 million off of the payroll while essentially having a team that I think is close to where we were ago. I would argue that I like this team better. I think we were unlucky this past season when we only won 83 games. So I think if you're saying to yourself, well, you won 83 games last year and you're kind of the same, maybe a little better, maybe a little worse, that doesn't sound that great. I hear you, but I think that we are better than an 83 win team a year ago, even though we are what our record says we are when all is said and done. But right now, I think this team can win into the mid to high 80s, certainly get back to the playoffs for a fourth consecutive season. And if Vance Honeycutt comes back completely healthy, and we are to make some improvements through the Rule 5 or the trade market or free agency in the bullpen or in our corner outfield over the next few months, I think we could definitely be a better team on paper heading into next season than we were at the end of last season, while still spending, when all is said and done, probably about $5 million less dollars than we did a year ago on payroll. And importantly, as far as payroll, with moving on from long-term commitments to Marcelo Meyer because of our injury concerns there, and Jace Barofin because it just wasn't that great a contract as much as we wanted the first round draft choice in the Buffalo Wings organization history to be a long-time member of the team after 5 seasons. I think it's time to move on from him. But those two combined, we've taken about $30+ million a year off of the books for the next 5+ seasons going forward. So I'd argue that we've obviously cut the salary by $9 million for this year. We've cut our salary expectations for years to come in terms of guaranteed contracts by $30 million by moving on from those two guys. And the team is about as good as it was. And I think when all is said and done with this offseason, I think we're going to feel, or I'm going to feel, that the team is better than it was a year ago. So although there haven't been any earth-shattering moves, and as I said, no major league free agents, I think we've definitely made some progress in terms of right-sizing our budget while trying to remain competitive with the team this season. If you ask me what the biggest fear is, it's obviously an injury to Adley Rutschman. He has been an all-star each of his 2 seasons with us here in the National League. He just won a Silver Slugger Award at catcher, was an above-average offensive player 2 years ago, well above average this past season, WARs of above 4 both years. Does a WAR of above 4 justify a $36 million contract? No. But an above-average offensive player who's also an above-average defensive player at a very important defensive position is a pretty rare thing to find. So are we overpaying for him? Yes. But there is scarcity value in a player like Rutschman. If we get the 115 to 125 games we've gotten from him each of his first 2 years in our uniform, I am sure he will be an above-average offensive player with very good defense and put up a WAR of 4 to 5 with us. But if he has some serious injuries and misses large chunks of the season, or his performance for whatever reason just drops off materially, that, given the amount of money we have invested in him, is the thing that could really derail our expectations for the upcoming 2031 season. And just in terms of Rutschman being a unique talent, plugged in his 65 defense, his 50 contact, 55 power, and 65 eye, I am guessing he is the only catcher in baseball who meets those criteria. I haven't done the search yet to check, so I may look like an idiot. But he is a very unique skill set among all of the catchers in Major League Baseball. Even if you bump the contact up and take the defense down a little bit, obviously Rutschman won't be on the list, but there's nobody that meet that criteria. So he is certainly a unique talent, and if we were to lose him for an extended period of time, given that he is about 25% of our payroll this year, that is the most obvious thing that I think could absolutely derail the upcoming season for our Buffalo Wings. So, with that summary of where I think we are as a team and what I think we've done this off season complete, time to jump into the episode. Would love to hear your thoughts on my analysis. Am I being too optimistic, too pessimistic? Am I accurate? Is there another fear other than Rutschman that I should be concerned about that could really cripple our season? As I said a few minutes ago, always interesting to hear what those of you who are watching are thinking about what we're doing here. Do tend to think that we'll probably sim through more time this episode than some of the previous ones. We don't have a ton of money to spend, about $3.5 million at this point, even though we have the right sized the budget compared to a year ago. And as I mentioned, with some of the moves we've made for the longer term, we've upped scouting and player development a bit from last year, which I think is important. So it doesn't leave us with a ton of additional money to play with. But as I mentioned, I think in the Rule 5 or the discount bin in a couple months from now, the free agent market, or maybe looking at some trades, and who knows, maybe having a trade proposed to us out of the blue, we can kind of address the needs that we need to address without spending a ton of money. So I'm guessing the next big activity for us is probably going to be the Rule 5 draft on Christmas Day. I don't think we're going to be all that active at the winter meetings this year. And we did just get a very tempting offer from the New York Yankees. It's the same offer in both of these emails for some odd reason. But they are looking for our utility infielder, Toshimitsu Kato. Great glove. Issue with him is just how much he's going to hit. Hit 223 and 121 at-bats for us at the major league level last year. But obviously love his glove as a potential insurance policy for a short-term injury to the likes of Seifu, Collier, and Swanson. He can basically play all of their positions, as good of them in the case of Swanson, and probably better than them in the cases of Collier and Seifu, at least defensively. Don't want him out in the lineup every day because he's just not quite a major league bat. But he still has a lot of value on our team. But the Yankees have offered us minor league left-handed pitcher Juan Guerrero, 17-year-old, who was a scouting discovery of theirs this past January. They had him in rookie ball where he was 0-2 with a 7.36 ERA. But he was also actually 16 years old when they were pitching him in rookie ball, which seems unnecessarily aggressive to me. But 17-year-old, throwing in the mid-90s, his fastball close to major league quality. Looks like his stuff and movement could be well above average, and even his control above average. Excellent stamina, really good at holding on runners. The concern is that he's fragile already at the age of 17, and whether or not he will actually develop as expected. If that curveball doesn't develop to at least a 50-55, he's probably a reliever rather than a starter. I am tempted by this deal, but I think what this deal tells me more than anything is that at 23 years old, with a couple of option years left and that potentially excellent defense, Toshimitsu Kato has some value. I'm not ready to move on from him yet, despite the temptation of a young pitching prospect, which those of you who have watched me over the years know I am always anxious to add young pitching prospects into my system. But given that we are still trying to win this year, I think I can probably, if I wanted to move on from Kato a year from now, get a similar-ish type prospect that is a roll of the dice, a 20% chance that he becomes what we think we can become. But there's certainly value in, if you've got a bunch of pitchers that have a 20% chance of ultimately having this profile when all is said and done, if you add enough of them onto your team and into your minor league system, you're eventually going to hit on a few of them. But I'm not quite ready to pull the trigger on dumping Kato right now. Would love to hear your thoughts on this one in the comments as well. I'm sure some of you think I'm nuts for keeping Kato, as opposed to putting a big time pitching prospect like that into our system. But I like Kato's glove very much, and there's no guarantee in my mind that Guerrero develops. And the fact that he's fragile already at 17 is a big turnoff to me, because he's probably, best case scenario, 4 or 5 years, probably closer to 6 years away from the majors. It's conceivable that if he has an injury or two over that period of time, he could be wrecked physically before he's even a major leaguer. And we've simmed ahead through the winter meetings, and nothing interesting has happened. We've gotten a bunch of trade offers. We've continued scouting international amateur free agents, but nothing substantive that we wanted to think about proceeding with. But I have gotten questions over the past week or so about our ballpark, which I've talked about in the comments, but wanted to share the factors of the ballpark for those who are interested. It's a ballpark that favors extra base hits, is a little tougher for home runs, as you can see. There's a lot of fair territory in the outfield, which means that there will be a good amount of doubles and triples. But with the fences being pretty far out there, home runs are going to be about 4% lower than average. Left-handers favored a little bit in terms of power. Right-handed hitters favored very slightly in terms of batting average. But all things considered, not anything real excessive that happens in the park, except for, again, perhaps more doubles and triples than normal, and a few fewer home runs than normal in other parks. And also wanted to talk briefly about the game settings and one change that I think I am going to make. Obviously, we're playing with the international amateur free agent pool, which I enjoy. I think it's been a good enhancement to the game this year. And you can see that I've got 8 international scouting discoveries per team on, which is supposedly more than average. But when I look at my organization, I have 5 players in the international complex right now. Arturo Flores, who's the top prospect in our system, an international free agent signing this past year. Juan Agramante, an international free agent signing a year ago. Arturo Reina, who was a scouting discovery. Sergio Mendoza, who was a scouting discovery. And Juan Pezmino, who was a scouting discovery. But because it doesn't seem like I am actually generating the 8 random scouting discoveries a year, in addition to the players available through international amateur free agency, what I've had to do is put a lot of veterans in my DSL team. And part of the reason I've done that is because I want this DSL team to be competitive on the field. But part of it, as you can see here, we just don't have a lot of teenage prospects in our system at this point, and we don't have too many teenage prospects on our team. So despite the fact that, according to the game settings, should be generating about 8 international scouting discoveries per team each season, it doesn't really seem to be doing that for me. So I'm going to bump that up to 16 per year. Now, clearly, if I was picking up 6 or 7 bargain basement amateur international free agents instead of focusing on 1 or 2 or 3 higher quality people each year, that would help a little bit on the margin. But it just doesn't seem like it's been generating the last couple years the amount of international scouting discoveries that it should. And, we've got a scouting budget, which is admittedly not as high as it was a few years ago. but it is still very focused on international, with 40% of our money going there. And we still have a scout who is outstanding at international scouting. So would be interested in what those of you who have tweaked with those settings are experiencing. To me, it doesn't seem like I am getting enough young talent into my international complex through scouting. So I am going to change that setting as well. And we've made it to the Rule 5 draft. We're going to have to be conscious of the amount of money some of these players are making. Sometimes in a Rule 5 draft, there will be a real interesting player who's making $3, $4, $5 million a year. Obviously, we could pull some money out of scouting and player development to make that happen, but despite the fact that we are going to be looking for help in the bullpen, help is a corner outfielder position, and help anywhere where we can actually find it in this draft, quite honestly. I don't think we want to necessarily pick someone who's making $5, $6, $7 million a year. Not that there should be too many of those players in the Rule 5, but there are a handful from time to time. And the one positive of coming off an 83-win season is we're going to be picking a lot earlier in the Rule 5 draft than we have the past several years, with the 20th pick overall. Go ahead and get the draft started, and we'll auto pick until we are on the board. And now let's see who is available. Just do the real rough search here at first. Only 5 or 7 if I could count 7 if I could count 3-star potential offensive players, and then there's a fair amount of 2.5-star potential players today that I'll have to check through. But look at the higher potential players first, especially the guys who are 2.5 stars already. First baseman Dave Creeth, pretty unexciting to me. Left fielder Juan Lastra, could be a decent 4th outfielder down the line. Don't know, with the way his profile looks today and the fact that his defense is not great, that he's somebody we'd want to spend a roster spot on, despite the concerns that we have at that position. First baseman Juan Morales, it's like a respectable bat, not too much in terms of the glove. Think he would probably struggle to make our roster. Another first baseman, Phil Morgan. Like the durability, like the fact that there's potentially plus contact and there's already plus home run power. Switch hitter, hasn't been above Double-A ball, but he did hit 305 in Double-A last year. Looks like he might have had some injury issues. And then he had a monster year in high A ball in 2029, 290 average, 41 homers, 120 ribbies, and 459 at-bats. But did have a fractured hand, which ended his season early last year at the beginning of June. So that explains why he didn't get a very long season in Double-A. Edgar Ojeda, right fielder. Probably one of the more interesting overall bats if it completely develops, but he's not good defensively, a 22-year-old with a not great personality. Don't know whether he's the guy. Zachariah Rackham, first baseman. Not all that exciting. And then the final of the 3-star potential hitters, Sherrell Reedus. Decently balanced profile, but best case scenario is he's kind of a average-ish major league player, doesn't bring much to the table defensively or on the base paths. So from an initial view, again, just looking at the highest potential players, not all that inspiring as far as the batters. Pitchers, certainly with the star ratings, looks a little more interesting. We'll take a look at these guys with the highest potential, and it's also the only 3.5-star guys. So I would hope that there's someone among these 5 pitchers who might be able to help us. David Arana, Not a bad profile. He's 25 years old. He's durable, good personality, throws in the high 90s. He actually does have a little bit of major league experience at the end of 2029, but for some reason they put him back in A and high A ball last year at the age of 24, where he was pretty good. We've got very high scouting accuracy on him. He's making the major league minimum. He's only got those 3 days of major league experience. Good at holding runners. He's a reliever, but I mean, you could start him if you had to, but I think I'd feel pretty good about having him out of the pen. He's going to give up some home runs, but his stuff is above average, control above average, really good fastball, a good cutter, an acceptable sinker, and as I mentioned, durability and a good personality. He's definitely interesting to me. And then these four guys are all actually further developed, supposedly, than Aranya, although Aranya is the youngest, so he's a guy that you could potentially be building around for the future more so. Jordy Andujar, great changeup, excellent fastball, well above average curve. Issue with him is just his movement and his control being below average, and that 40 movement with his extreme fly ball tendencies has been a bit of a problem. You can see at the major league level, 9 homers in 66 innings, 7 homers in 40 innings, and 9 homers in 41 and 2/3 innings. So he's going to give up a lot of home runs. Brandon Hughes, veteran left-hander, making a little over $1 million. Another guy with fly ball tendencies and below average movement, but very impressive stuff. And see what his major league stats look like over the course of his career. Certainly a well above average pitcher with a 144 ERA plus, a 91 FIP minus, 2.79 SIERA. He's been a pretty productive bullpen arm over the course of his career. Oswald Mori, 28-year-old out of Venezuela. Don't love that he's fragile. Don't love the low work ethic, but as I've mentioned in the comments and some of you have talked about with me back and forth, although I try to avoid low work ethic prospects and do everything possible to not have low work ethic prospects, just because the chances of any prospect developing the way that you think they are when they're 17 or 18 years old is low to begin with. And if they've got the poor work ethic, it's just one more strike against them. But for a 28-year-old who's basically fully developed, it bothers me a little less. Not a great influence in the clubhouse, can still lead to more suspensions and those kinds of things. But it's not a deal breaker for me. But another guy with below average movement and control. And then Gavin Stone, closer. He's got an interesting profile. 4-pitch arsenal, a little better movement and control, particularly the movement than some of those guys that we've looked at more recently, making almost $2.2 million. His stuff is really good. Still going to give up some home runs being a fly ball pitcher with average movement. But there's definitely some options to help the back end of our rotation here. I'm going to do a little more searching and thinking about what to do as far as both batters and pitchers. And then obviously I'll see what our scout recommends. But right now I would certainly think I'm leaning towards a pitcher in the first round. All right, I have a direction that I am leaning, but let's see what our scouting director recommends. And he recommends the reliever Edward Cabrera, not someone that we've talked about yet. Making $1.1 million, 33 years old, similar to some of the other guys we've talked about, movement and control below average. Now, he is a guy with a 5-pitch arsenal of generally average-ish major league pitches, with the exception of his changeup. So he could, with that stamina, be a spot starter for us. But I, as I sometimes do, am going to go with the youth and potential of David Aranya. I like the durability. I like that he's 25 years old, making the major league minimum the next 3 seasons. Obviously, we're going to need to keep him on the major league roster if we're going to retain him this year, but then he will have option years left for the future. Like the high work ethic, likes that he throws in the high 90s. His control better than a lot of the guys we've looked at. Movement average, he's going to give up some home runs, but he throws pretty hard, and at least he's not fly ball tendencies. Going to be a big jump from high A ball to the majors. I don't think there's a guarantee that he makes our 26-man roster, but I think he is a very interesting arm to at least bring into our organization and give a chance. So we are going to go ahead and draft David Aranya here with our first pick in the Rule 5 draft. And you can see here in the second round, all 4 of those other guys who we think are 3.5 stars overall right now are around. You can see some familiar names among some of these other veterans that are around. Scouting director recommends that we go with Antonio Senzatella. Speaking of veteran pitchers, that stuff of 35, I just don't see that working. His movement and his control are fantastic, but 35 stuff just doesn't work. So we will definitely not be going that route. I think that we will probably make at least 1, if not 2 more picks. But Senzatella will not be the selection. And it doesn't seem to me like there are in some years a pretty interesting outfield prospect who's 22, 23 years old. Not a top 100 or 200 prospect by any stretch, but a lot of years we've found decent young outfielders, similar to Rafael Rodillo last year, who at least have a chance of making the roster as a 5th outfielder. And I haven't found that youth this year, but there is a guy that we're going to pick here in the second round, Mason Neville, 26, almost 27 years old. You can see his bat is average-ish for the major leagues at best, but he's a competent defensive corner outfielder. He's got a little bit of speed. He has a little bit of major league experience at this point, 22 days over the last couple seasons with Washington. I don't think he makes our 26-man roster, but given that we are just looking for options as far as a corner outfielder, and there's certainly a chance that we might need 1 extra corner outfielder when the season begins if Vance Honeycutt is not quite ready to go from his UCL injury. I think that Neville is the best option of just a guy who can hold down a position on the roster for us for a little bit of time. Certainly no guarantees that he makes the team. Certainly has less upside, as I said, than some other outfielders we've picked in the Rule 5 over the years. But given that, as I said earlier, we have lost Barofin, York, and Lang Choi, who were all corner outfielders for us last year, throwing another guy into the mix for spring training doesn't seem like the worst idea in the world to me. And moving on to the third round, scouting director still recommends we go with Senzatella. I am going to go in a different direction. You may have noticed Pablo Aliendo there, the catcher. Backup catcher right now is likely similar to last year, where our DH Basallo or Tanner Shillette, perhaps both of them on the roster, backing up Rutschman. Josh Springer in AAA is probably a little better defensively than both of those guys. But backup catcher is definitely not a position we have completely figured out. And certainly Pablo Aliendo, above average defensively with an excellent personality, could fit. I just don't think he is a major league hitter at this point. So I'm going to go in a different direction for a catcher that we bring on board. And I'm going to go with Brady Neal. Also a guy who's above average defensively, not well above average, but still more competent defensively than any potential backup catchers we have in the mix right now. And while his bat is definitely going to be below average at the major league level, I think he can potentially hit respectably there. He hit 265 with 15 homers in Jacksonville last year. No guarantees that he makes the team, but I don't mind bringing a guy like that into camp as well. So we are going to draft Brady Neal also. I didn't mention this at the start of the draft, but we only had 29 guys on our 40-man roster with all the trades and all the moves we've made this offseason. So we've added those 3 guys since the start of the draft. But we certainly have potential to just bring guys into camp at this point and see if anybody sticks. And here in the 4th round, Senzatella is still the recommendation of our scout. Still not going to go there. May go bring one more pitcher into camp. That's what we are going to decide right now. And I am going to take advantage of the option of the Rule 5 draft, and we are going to bring Brandon Hughes into camp, making just over $1 million. As I talked about, the movement concerns me a little bit, particularly being a fly ball pitcher. But he's got a good personality. He has a nice 3-pitch arsenal. His stuff and his control well above average. And as we talked about, he has been a pretty good major league pitcher over the course of his career. Now, granted, last year definitely showed some regression from the numbers that he's put up over the course of his career in terms of his ERA plus and his FIP minus, but his SIERA was still lower than his career value, still struck out well over a batter an inning, didn't give up many walks. The home runs were a huge issue with 17 over 91 and a third innings pitched. So definitely no guarantee that he's going to make our roster. But for a guy who's only going to be making about $300,000 more than the major league minimum, and a guy who is very tough on lefties, I think there's a chance he could make our 26-man roster. Just a chance, definitely not a certainty, but gives us one more arm in camp. Apparently he's a popular player that the fans like to see in camp as well. Since he does have a major league contract, that took down some of the money that we theoretically have available. But obviously, if we see a signing that we want to make in the free agent market or salary we need to take on in the trade market, we can adjust scouting and development, and we could obviously just send him back from whence he came if we decided that he was not in the long-term plans or the short-term plans, depending on if we were trying to make a trade for another pitcher that we thought was better. So gives us a little more optionality. So a couple of pitchers, an outfielder, and a catcher are our selections in the Rule 5 draft this year. I think we're going to call it after those 4 rounds. And there definitely was not a lot of activity in the Rule 5 draft this past season. You can see only 3 different teams picked players, the White Sox, the Yankees, and us. And there were only 7 players picked in total, and 4 of them were picked by our team. Look at the 2 guys that were picked ahead of our pick. Tyler Pike, probably not a guy we would have taken. Like the fact that he's a starter, but 36 years old, fragile. I think we still would have went with Aranya over him. Catcher Arturo Contreras. there's a lot to like and there's a lot not to like. Love the durability, love the personality, love the incredible defense. But the bat is just not a major league bat, and it doesn't look like it's ever going to be a major league bat. He did hit 272 with 10 homers in Double A last year. Certainly as a 24-year-old, if he was on the list of available players when we drafted, it would have been an interesting decision for me with a player like him, since he is young, but we just don't see any potential for him to really be a major league hitter. If, he was a guy that we thought could improve in some of these areas, well, one, he may not have been available in the Rule 5 draft, but that certainly would have made him a more interesting prospect for us to consider. And the calendar has flipped to 2031. Obviously, the Rule 5 draft behind us. Big activity that's going to be coming up soon is International Amateur Free Agency, and we've got the opportunity to run our final camp now that we are in the month of January. I think we're largely going to bring the same players into camp as last time, but David Arrives, don't love his personality, like the fact that he's durable, like the fact that he's potentially got a 4, 5, or 6 pitch arsenal. Our scouts just kind of not as high on him as some of the other guys. Sees him with 2.5 star potential. And he's also a guy who's supposedly looking for $3.2 million when there's a lot of pitchers and a lot of position players who we think are better than him that aren't looking for the same kind of money. So I think it's conceivable if now that we've continued scouting players more and more, and you can see we're at least average on everybody now, and we're high on the guys that we've been bringing into camp. I don't love Julio Contilla. We talked about his bad personality before and pretty mediocre defensively. Jesus Aguirre is fine. Not a big-time prospect, but looking for decent money. Daniel Bustos, don't love the personality. I am very intrigued by Arturo Resendiz, only looking for $130,000, supposedly. League interest very low. Good personality, and if everything works out, could have an above-average major league bat. Not great defensively, not a ton of speed, but if we could bring a guy on him like him on board for $150,000 to supplement one of the bigger time prospects, I think that would be something to think about at least. David Valdivino, second baseman. I am a little intrigued by him. Don't love the defense, but he's durable, and the bat could be interesting. And then Masao Zavalos out of Brazil, little less interested in his bat. Do like the outfield range. But I think among these guys, I like David Valdivino the best. So I am going to uninvite Arrives from our private practice and use the 10th invitation for the private practice on David Valdivino. So we've got these 10 guys that we are going to put through the final practice here. I'll lock all of them, even though this is the final practice. Hopefully we'll get a nice boost in what we know about Valdivino, and hopefully most of these other guys will come out with very high scouting accuracy and hopefully even better relationships with some of these players. Yeah, now we got very strong relationships with a lot of them, very high scouting accuracy on some. So definitely know more about the potential universe of players that we will be potentially negotiating with in just over a week. And we've now made it to the start of the international amateur free agent signing period. I've continued to scout some of those top prospects over the past week plus to make sure that I've got the best report possible on all of them. So I'm going to just take a quick look now at the top prospects, finish off the episode. Probably will have some time before I do the next episode. So if you've got thoughts on the direction where maybe we should go in international amateur free agency that you haven't shared them previously, would love to hear them. The four people that we've been bringing into camp are the four starting pitchers that, or four pitching prospects that we think have 3-star potential or higher. You can see league interest high or very high in all of them. We do have very strong relationships with Izaguirre and Romero. Eddie Izaguirre, 16-year-old, like the durability. His fastball's close to major league level. Movement looks like it could be exceptional, above average stuff, average control. Almost 17 years old. Certainly a guy to think about. Luis Miranda, another 16-year-old out of Venezuela. He is really a bullpen arm. The changeup may not develop, and even if it does develop to where we think it can at 40, just don't see that working as a starter. Do like the high work ethic and like the fact that his stuff, movement, and control could all be well above average. And he's only looking for $850,000. If we decided we just wanted to try to pick somebody who is a pure reliever, that could be something to consider. Alvaro Romero, looking for the most money of this crew. Durable, really good personality, good stamina, decent at holding runners. Question is whether that curveball develops, but he's a lefty throwing in the low to mid 90s. Certainly an interesting prospect. And then last but not least, Luis Espinoza, potential 4-pitch arsenal, great stamina, not as good as holding runners. His stuff is a little less exceptional than the other guys, but movement and control could be both well above average if he reaches his full potential. Clearly, I don't think he's as big a prospect as those first 3 pitchers. I mean, Izaguirre and Romero, to me, are the two that you comp to each other because those are both potentially 3-pitch guys who could be starters at the major league level. And then, as we talked about, I view Miranda as a reliever, but still think he could be an interesting guy to layer in to the people we pursue this offseason. You know, if we could get him for $850,000, and then when we move to the batters, we could get the guy that we talked about in Arturo Resendez for $130,000, $150,000. Get those 2 guys for $1 million, and then if we could get a bigger time prospect with the other $3.75 million we have, that would be a pretty interesting offseason in international amateur free agency. The question is, with that additional $3.75 million, can we actually get one of the top prospects, or are they all going to end up going for max or max plus kind of money? So that's what I'm thinking about. We'll go from the bottom up with these guys. David Valdivino, we don't know him as well, just brought him into camp. Like the durability, potentially interesting-ish bat for an infielder, but not great defensively. Tend to think he won't be a direction that we're going to pursue that heavily. Arturo Resendez, as I said, really like the personality. The potential for the bat is to be above average. Not great defensively, but not horrible. Not tons of speed, but not horrible. His big attraction is the potential bargain basement cost and the fact that it doesn't seem like there's a lot of interest in him. Domingo Aguilar, a center fielder, like the durability, a little better defensively, but quite honestly, for the amount of money they're looking for a couple of center fielders, and admittedly, Resendez is not really a center fielder at the major league level. He's more of a corner outfielder, but would I rather spend $1.5 million on Aguilar or 1/10 of that on Resendez? I think I would definitely go with Resendez there. Jorge Garza, this is a guy that intrigues me just because, admittedly, the bat probably will not develop. But if this bat develops and he's durable enough to play every day, you've got yourself a heck of a designated hitter, or perhaps even a first baseman at 6'5" with those ratings. So he is interesting to me. Supposedly only looking for 1.4 million. If he's a guy who could ultimately be layered in with the likes of Resendez and a Miranda, not the worst thing in the world if I decided I didn't want to really pursue one of the big pitching prospects. But obviously we haven't talked about the two top hitting prospects yet, and there will certainly be a high level of temptation for me here. Ignacio Mendoza looks like a dream potential contact 75 and home run 80 potential. Could obviously be a devastating offensive force if those two metrics develop. Doesn't bring much else to the table. No speed, not a lot defensively. Don't love the low leadership. Given that he's looking for 2.2 million, I think I'd probably be inclined to go with Garza over him. But then there is Humberto Chicas, another guy, no speed, adequate defensively, but a potentially very interesting bat. I just don't love the fragility there. So I'm definitely torn at this point, and if you have thoughts, I would love to hear them. As I said, if I could get a Resendez for about 150,000 and a Miranda for 850,000, again, that would leave me with 3.75 million. In a perfect world, if I could come out of this with a Miranda and a Resendez, and then with that last 3.75 million, I could guarantee myself a Garza or a Izaguirre or a Romero as a top-end pitching prospect, starting pitching prospect, to go with the reliever and the center fielder. I think that would be a pretty interesting international amateur free agent period. Whether or not that's practical, who knows? I mean, it's conceivable that Miranda ends up going for several $1 million. It's conceivable, perhaps even probable, that Resendez ends up going for more than 130,000, and he could certainly end up at $1 million when all is said and done. But I do think I am perhaps not going to be going after the top end of the market in Chicas and Mendoza. Garza and Resendez, just in terms of the value in their profiles, I think are the guys I'm leaning towards among the batters. And the pitchers, I like Izaguirre and Romero. Probably need to give some more thought to which one of them I really prefer. If I could get one of those starters along with Miranda when all is said and done, I think that wouldn't even be a horrible way to come out of the international amateur free agent period. But if you've got thoughts on how I should proceed, would love to hear them in the comments. Gonna finish up this episode then, because it's obviously been a pretty busy one with the Rule 5 draft and with the kind of analysis on summary of what we've done so far this off season, along with more recently, obviously talking through a lot of the international amateur free agents. So if you've got thoughts on which direction we should go, would love to hear them. Until our next episode, thanks so much for watching and hope you have a great day.